Welcome back to Zara Recaps. Today, I'm going to explain a 2012 sci-fi comedy film titled Robot, and frank spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. In the near future, in Cold Spring, New York, ex-convict Frank Weld resides alone in the woods and attempts to overlook the reality that he is experiencing cognitive decline and dementia, leading to confusion and memory impairment. This condition causes him to engage in activities such as claiming he has dined at a restaurant that actually shut down 5 years ago, believing his son is still attending college, or attempting to rob his own home in the dead of night. He also lives in squalor, never tidying up, and refuses to open the curtains to let daylight into his residence. The one occasion he leaves his house is to visit the library, which he is the sole patron of due to the decline in print media. Consequently, it will soon be converted into a community center. Frank not only enjoys going there to collect more books but also relishes seeing the librarian, Jennifer, whom he has a romantic interest in. After each visit to the library, he stops by the nearby beauty parlor and steals a small item for his collection. One afternoon, he's visited by his son, Hunter, who drives there every weekend, cutting the time he spends with his own family for it. He's genuinely concerned about his father's condition, which worsens every time he talks to him, and he also wants to spend more time with his own children. But since Frank refuses to go to a nursing home, Hunter has instead brought him a robotic program to serve as a butler and a therapeutic care provider. Frank doesn't want anything to do with it either, even claiming his wife wouldn't approve, despite Hunter reminding him that he's been divorced for 30 years and his mother no longer lives there. Hunter won't accept any excuses. The robot stays, or he will send Frank to a memory care facility because he doesn't want his father's demise to be his responsibility. Unable to find a way to deactivate the robot, Frank permits it to handle the chores just to get it off his back. The robot not only tidies the entire house but also does grocery shopping and prepares nutritious meals. It also wakes Frank up quite early in the morning, claiming they need to establish a routine to help keep him oriented. Between this and the nutritious meals, Frank becomes very irritated with the robot, especially when it suggests he start a garden, saying he needs a project to keep his mind engaged. The garden ends up being managed solely by the robot, but Frank does gradually come to accept the robot in other ways. It prepares his meals, trims his hair, keeps his home tidy, and simply provides him with companionship. They go for hikes together too, which Frank isn't particularly fond of, but the robot quickly learns it can get Frank to do things for his own benefit by threatening that if he doesn't, it will call Hunter to take him to the memory center, or that it will be sent back to the warehouse and have his memory erased for failing to save his life. There is one thing he doesn't allow the robot to do, however, and that's to enter the library with him. While it waits outside and gets bothered by children, Frank visits Jennifer only to find her conversing with a young man called Jake Finn, a wealthy young developer leading the library renovation project, who would love to converse more with Frank in the future because he lived through the era when print media was the sole option and finds that intriguing. However, for now, he must leave as he is quite occupied. Once he departs, Jennifer shows Frank the modifications being made to the library. All the miscellaneous novels will be recycled, but there are a few special editions of classics like Don Quixote that will be set aside for preservation. Jennifer wishes she could keep them for herself. When he exits the library, Frank finds the robot being bothered by children and, after sending them away, instructs it that if someone doesn't leave after being asked, it should declare a self-destruct sequence initiated and start a countdown from 10 to scare them off. Next, they head to the beauty salon, which Frank refers to as Harry's, like the restaurant that once occupied the space. He attempts to pilfer a small figurine but is compelled to abandon it when the shopkeeper nearly catches him in the act. On their way home, however, Frank discovers that the robot has taken the figurine for him. It understands terms like stealing and shoplifting, but it lacks a sense of ethics, and the law hasn't been programmed into it either. Frank finds himself quite enjoying this aspect of the robot and decides to teach it how to pick locks, calling it the project that can keep him engaged instead of the garden. This gives him an idea, and so Frank breaks his own rule and brings the robot into the library with him so it can learn where everything, especially the antique books, is located. They encounter Jennifer, who informs them about an upcoming fundraiser party and invites Frank to be her +1, which Frank agrees to. Afterwards, he and the robot inspect the security system outside the library, and Frank finally confesses he wants to come at night and steal the old copy of Don Quixote. The robot doesn't think it's a very good idea because adhering to Frank's routine is important for keeping him oriented, but Frank persuades it to assist him by emphasizing how engaged he will feel. This new endeavor is keeping him engaged. He hasn't felt this invigorated in a while. Hunter calls him one evening to reprimand him for having complained about the robot to his sister, who is now pressuring him to take the robot back. Frank tells him he's changed his mind and wants to keep it, surprising Hunter when he advises him to spend more time with his children. After they hang up, Frank worries that the robot might have been revealing their secret project, but the robot assures him that building trust by respecting privacy is part of its care program. Later that evening, they easily break into the library thanks to Frank's lifelong experience as a cat burglar. The robot retrieves Don Quixote and tells Frank they need to leave when it notices he's starting to get disoriented and asks strange questions like why it's wearing a space helmet. The duo exits the library safely, but Frank forgets his glasses on the table. When they return home, Frank is so exhilarated by their success that he doesn't want to go to bed yet, and this begins to take a toll on him. He starts talking to the robot, believing it is his son. Frank expresses remorse over missing so much of his life in prison, unable to witness his son's growth and not even recognizing him the first time he saw him after his release. The next morning, Frank receives a call from his daughter, Madison, who is traveling in Turkmenistan. She has learned through Hunter that Frank is keeping the robot and thinks her brother is leaving him with just a machine. Frank can't help but respond that at least Hunter is doing something. Madison apologizes for not being available and reminds him that traveling is part of her job. When night falls, Frank and the robot attend the fundraiser party with the intention of presenting Don Quixote to Jennifer. However, they abandon that plan when she describes the theft as something dreadful. While Jennifer is mingling with the donors, Frank notices that Jake is conversing with Sheriff Rawlings while casting occasional glances in his direction. Jake decides to approach him to ask if he has ever been to prison and if he wears reading glasses, before requesting him not to visit anymore. When Jennifer finds Frank afterward, he has become somewhat paranoid and begins to suspect that this whole situation might be a scam because the donors seem excessively wealthy. The next day, Frank makes the robot show him its memory of the party, growing envious that the robot can recall things so effortlessly. Observing all the expensive jewelry the guests were wearing, he starts planning their next heist, which the robot protests against once again. Frank reminds it that this kind of activity is stimulating him more than the Dumbarton and assures he'll address all potential risks to ensure a flawless operation. The robot agrees, allowing Frank to focus solely on the casing while he continues his research to stay engaged. The duo begins observing Jake's house from a distance to gather details about Jake and his wife's daily routines and the home security systems. While they observe, they discuss a range of topics, and Frank starts to ponder how much of the robot's actions are based on its own decisions rather than just programming. The robot asserts that everything is just programming, which Frank doubts due to the robot's earlier expression of not wanting its memory erased. To Frank's surprise, the robot confesses that it only said that to manipulate Frank, not because it has any genuine desires of its own. It is acutely aware that it is not alive, which unsettles Frank. One evening, while working on his plans, Jennifer knocks on the door, stating she has come over for dinner. Frank had completely forgotten about it, but instead of admitting his lapse, he tells her he's still preparing and asks her to return later. Jennifer leaves, looking quite hurt after placing the pie she brought on the porch. The next day, Frank finishes wrapping Don Quixote and goes to the library with the intention of giving it to her, but upon hearing the contemporary music coming from the building, he changes his mind. The two of them continue to observe Jake throughout the week until one day their planning and scheming are disrupted when Madison appears out of nowhere at the house. She's been reflecting a lot about how she hasn't been there for Frank, so she claims she's come to rescue him from the robot. Frank tries to tell her he likes the robot, but she disregards him and uses the password she obtained from Hunter to deactivate it. Even though he has his daughter's company now, Frank misses the robot and the way it cared for him, which Madison doesn't even begin to match. As a form of protest, he starts behaving messily again, turning the house back into a mess in just one day. But when he wakes up one morning, he finds that every room is spotlessly clean, and Madison says she stayed up all night to accomplish it. Frank doesn't believe her and accuses her of hypocrisy for having used the robot. After explaining how he needs it because it's his friend, she relents and agrees to reactivate it, provided he promises they won't rely entirely on it in the future. Later that evening, Frank outlines his plan to steal the diamonds from Jake's house to the robot, which acknowledges the plan is quite good but still concerns about Frank's well-being. Thus, it agrees to assist with the heist. Only if Frank agrees to a new diet from now on. At Jake's, they wait for the couple to leave, then enter the house through a door not protected by the alarm system. Frank knows from experience that all security systems have a blind spot. The robot then forces open the safe, a task that would typically take a thief weeks but can be completed by a robot in minutes. The only problem they encounter is the couple returning sooner than anticipated while they are about to exit the premises. They just need to wait for the couple to become distracted before they can successfully sneak away. The next day, while Frank and Madison are sunbathing and enjoying a drink, the robot lets two guests into the house, Jake and Rolling. Jake is convinced that Frank was the one who stole the book and now has the diamonds, and he wants Rolling to arrest him. However, the sheriff is cordial for the moment and says he doesn't believe Frank could have accomplished it at his age, so he suggests that Frank become their consultant. Frank dismisses them both without even considering the offer. When it's time for Madison to return to her job, Frank gives her a pair of diamond earrings as a contribution to her cause, insisting they are leftover from the old days and not Jake's. She leaves after acknowledging she was mistaken about the robot, and as Frank watches her drive away, he notices a van parked nearby. He realizes he is being watched and, worried about being caught, rushes back inside to start burning all the evidence. However, he refuses to erase the robot's memory when it identifies its hard drive as evidence as well. The only remaining issue is the actual diamonds, and when the robot expresses concern about Frank's erratic behavior. Behaving erratically gives him an idea. He gets into bed and has the robot call Hunter to inform him that he's dying. Hunter comes to visit him, and Frank exaggerates some fake symptoms while delivering a heartfelt speech, admitting he's been an absent father and expressing gratitude for all Hunter has done for him. Once he has Hunter completely won over, he presents him with a briefcase and asks him to conceal it. Hunter agrees to do so only when Frank mentions his desire to leave everything behind cleanly. Hunter places the briefcase in the trunk of his car, but just as he's about to leave, he's halted by Jake Rawlings and his men, who open the trunk and reveal the contents of the bag, only to find the trinkets from the beauty shop. Jake claims this should be sufficient for probable cause, so they proceed to search the house, which Frank permits because he's confident they won't discover anything. Realizing he's been deceived, Hunter becomes angry with Frank and remarks that not having been raised by him is actually a blessing. The police are unable to find the diamonds, so Jake suggests they should examine the robot's memory. Frank tries to intervene, but the men ignore him. Fortunately for Frank, the robot remembers the trick his owner taught him and, as the men approach, pretends to initiate its self-destruct program. Everyone rushes outside, except Hunter, who knows it's a bluff. Seizing the opportunity, Frank sneaks around the house, gets into his car, which he hasn't driven in a long time, and after picking up the robot through the back door, drives toward the town, ignoring his companion's request to erase it. They arrive at the library, and the robot picks the lock so they can enter and see Jennifer. Frank apologizes to her and admits to having stolen Don Quixote. He wants to share more about his life, but he is suddenly distracted by some photographs on the wall. In a startling realization, he sees that Jennifer is his ex-wife and the mother of his children. Due to his memory issues, he hadn't recognized her after his release from jail because she looks older. This revelation overwhelms him, so after kissing her, he leaves the library and returns home, where Hunter and the police are still waiting for him. He and the robot rush inside and lock the door behind them. Frank then begins to devise a new escape plan. The robot again tries to persuade him that deleting its memory is the best course of action, as it would allow things to return to normal and give Frank a chance to plan his next heist. As the robot starts reciting all the burglary philosophy Frank taught it, he realizes how deep his obsession has become and finally comes to terms with what he must do. The robot opens a compartment on its back, and Frank presses the button inside it, effectively erasing all the memories on its hard drive. Some time later, Frank is residing in a nursing home, where Jennifer, Madison, and Hunter visit him frequently. One day, after having lunch together as a family, he slips a small piece of paper into Hunter's hand with a note suggesting that the diamonds have been concealed under the tomatoes in the garden. The robot had begun